The streets of Los Angeles shimmered under the neon glow, the city still awake in the deep hours of the night. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson gripped the steering wheel of his black custom Ford F-150, exhaustion creeping into his bones after another grueling 16-hour filming day. His truck rolled to a stop at a red light, the deep rumble of the engine the only sound in his cab. He exhaled, stretching his fingers. He could already taste the ice-cold tequila waiting at home, the thought of his quiet mansion a welcome contrast to the chaos of the film set. But then, a shadow moved on the sidewalk. At first, it was just a glance, nothing more. A man slumped against the brick wall of an abandoned gas station, wrapped in a ragged military jacket. The dim glow of a flickering street lamp revealed a weathered face, sunken eyes, and hands clenched around something small, a folded yellowed piece of paper. The Rock's instincts flared. Something about the man didn't feel like just another person down on his luck. The way he sat, back straight despite the cold. The way his eyes darted to every moving car, assessing threats. The way his fingers gripped that piece of paper like it was the last thing keeping him tethered to reality. Then, just before the light turned green, the man reached into his tattered coat and pulled out something, a military ID card. He flipped it open, staring at it for a long moment, jaw tight, shoulders tense. Something inside Dwayne twisted. The blare of a horn behind him shattered the moment. Green light. Move. Keep driving. But he couldn't. His hands tightened on the wheel. He knew what it was like to feel forgotten, to be a ghost in your own life, watching everything slip away. Screw it. He flicked on his turn signal and pulled over. The pavement was still warm from the day's heat as the Rock stepped out of his truck. The homeless man didn't react at first, just sat there, staring at the ID in his hand, his fingers trembling slightly. "Hey, brother." Dwayne's voice rumbled low, his usual booming confidence softened. "You okay?" The man's head snapped up, eyes sharp with instinct, as if expecting a threat. He had the look of a man who had been on high alert for too many years. For a second, he just stared, maybe because it wasn't every day that a 6'5", 260-pound Hollywood megastar was looming over you. "Jesus," the man muttered under his breath, blinking as if trying to confirm he wasn't hallucinating. "Yeah," the Rock cut in, offering a lopsided smile. "It's me, big bald guy, does action movies, eyebrow thing. But forget that. What's your name?" The man hesitated, then looked down at his ID, as if reminding himself of the answer. "James, Corporal James Reed, USMC, United States Marine Corps." Dwayne felt it like a gut punch. He'd always respected the military, always spoken up for veterans, but standing face to face with one who had been left behind by the system, who had given his life to his country only to end up here, on the streets, it made something burn deep in his chest. James shifted uncomfortably, gripping the ID like a lifeline. "Look, man," his voice was hoarse, edged with exhaustion. "If you're looking to do some inspirational video thing for Instagram, I ain't interested. I don't need a pity story." Dwayne chuckled, shaking his head. "Nah, brother, no cameras, no speeches, just two guys talking. You hungry?" James snorted, though it lacked humor. "I don't need charity." "Neither do I." Dwayne shrugged, then gestured at his own body. "But I also don't need this many muscles, and yet, here we are." For the first time, James let out a short, rough laugh. Dwayne nodded toward his truck. "Come on, I know a diner a few blocks away. Place has got damn good pancakes." James hesitated. It was pride versus hunger, a battle he was losing. Finally, he sighed, stuffing the ID back into his pocket. "Fine, but if the pancakes suck, I'm calling you out on it." Dwayne grinned. "Fair deal, brother." And just like that, James climbed into the passenger seat, and the Rock pulled back onto the road, completely unaware that this conversation would change both of their lives forever. The rumble of the truck's engine filled the silence between them. The city lights blurred past as Dwayne drove through the empty streets, the deep hum of the tires on asphalt the only sound between them for a long time. James sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his hands balled into fists on his lap, his shoulders tense like he was ready to be thrown out at any moment. Dwayne had seen that kind of posture before. The way a man carries himself after life has knocked him down too many times. The way someone looks when they've learned to expect the worst. He didn't push, he just drove, letting James get used to the fact that he was sitting in a truck with a man whose face had been plastered on billboards, movie posters, and Super Bowl commercials. It wasn't the first time Dwayne had been in a situation like this. He'd met people who had been at rock bottom before, and he knew one thing. They don't want speeches. They don't want bullshit. They want to be treated like people. "You got a preference?" Dwayne finally asked, breaking the silence. James blinked, glancing over at him. "What? For food? You the eggs and bacon type? Or are you more of a pancakes guy?" A ghost of a smirk tugged at the corner of James's mouth. "I said I'd judge the pancakes. Didn't say I was eating them." Dwayne laughed. All right. But just know, if you skip out on pancakes, you're officially on my shit list." The tension in James's shoulders loosened. Just a little. Not much, but enough for Dwayne to know he was on the right track. They pulled up to a small diner on the outskirts of town, one of those places that had probably looked exactly the same for the last 50 years. The kind with old neon signs buzzing over faded red booths, the smell of coffee and grease hanging thick in the air. Dwayne parked and cut the engine. James hesitated before stepping out, glancing around like he was expecting someone to tell him to leave. Inside, a waitress barely looked up from wiping down a table as they walked in. "Sit anywhere you like, honey," she called, her voice rough from years of smoking. Dwayne led the way to a booth in the back, away from the big windows. James followed slowly, sinking into the seat across from him. His hands rested on the table, fingers twitching slightly, his eyes darting around the room. He was still on edge. Dwayne leaned back against the booth, watching him carefully. "How long you been out here?" James exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "Too long. That a real answer, or you just don't feel like talking yet?" James let out a dry chuckle. "Little bit of both." He tapped his fingers against the table. "Couple years, I guess, not all at once. Bounced around, tried to hold down jobs, didn't work out." The waitress came by, dropping menus in front of them and pouring 2 cups of coffee. James barely glanced at his fingers still twitching against the Formica tabletop. Dwayne didn't pick up his menu. "What happened, man?" James's jaw tightened. He stared at the tabletop, his lips pressing into a thin line. He was silent for so long that Dwayne almost didn't expect him to answer. Then, finally, James exhaled sharply. "Came back from my 3rd deployment. Thought I had it handled. Thought I could just flip the switch, you know? Get back to normal." Dwayne nodded slowly. He didn't need to ask what it was. He knew. PTSD. The ghosts that followed soldiers home. The ones no one else could see. James clenched his jaw. "VA got me into a couple programs, said I was fine, but I wasn't. My wife, she tried, man. She really did. But I wasn't the same guy she married. Got angry too easy. Started drinking." He let out a bitter laugh. "One day, she left a note on the table and took the kids to her sister's place in Texas. Told me to get help." Dwayne stayed quiet. He could feel the weight of those words, the regret wrapped in them like barbed wire. James let out a slow breath. "I tried to pull it together, but the jobs I could get didn't last. Couldn't keep my temper in check. Couldn't sleep without waking up in a sweat. The VA did what they could, but I slipped through the cracks. Eventually the money ran out. The apartment, too." He swallowed hard. "And that was it. One day, you wake up and realize you're the guy sitting outside a gas station with an empty cup." Silence settled between them, thick and heavy. Dwayne reached for his coffee, staring down at the dark liquid. "That ever happened to you overseas?" James frowned. "What?" Dwayne lifted his gaze, running out of options. James blinked, caught off guard. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Dwayne leaned forward, his massive forearms resting on the table. "You ever get stranded, ambushed, pinned down?" James nodded slowly. "Yeah, couple times." "What did you do?" James let out a slow breath, his voice quieter. "Found another way out." Dwayne nodded. "Then why the hell are you acting like there's no way out of this?" James stared at him. For the first time, his eyes weren't distant. They were locked onto Dwayne's, processing the words like they were a challenge. Dwayne leaned back again, letting the silence stretch. Then he smirked. "Now hurry up and order, man. I don't let just anybody share pancakes with me." James exhaled, shaking his head. But when the waitress came back, he picked up the menu. and for the first time in a long time, he looked like a man making a decision for himself. The plates had been cleared, the check paid, but James hadn't moved from the booth. He sat with his hands wrapped around the last of his coffee, fingers absently tracing the rim of the mug. His eyes were distant again, lost somewhere in a memory, and for the first time since they sat down, he looked lighter. Not by much, but enough for Dwayne to notice. They had talked about everything but the obvious: baseball, movies, even a little pro wrestling, which got James to crack a genuine smile when Dwayne mimicked one of his old promos from his WWE days. But beneath it all, James was still hesitant, still guarded, still a man who wasn't sure if hope was something he was allowed to have anymore. Dwayne could have left it there, paid for his meal, shook his hand, walked away. He'd done his good deed, right? Given the guy a warm meal, a conversation, a moment of normalcy. But that wasn't how he operated. "All right," Dwayne said, stretching his arms across the back of the booth. "Here's the deal. You got a choice to make." James gave him a skeptical look. "A choice?" "That's right." Dwayne leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "You walk out of here, I drive you back to where I found you, and that's that. No hard feelings, no strings attached." James scoffed. "Sounds like a hell of a deal." Dwayne wasn't smiling anymore. His voice dropped, steady and firm. "Or, you come with me, right now. No bullshit, no excuses. You let me make a call, get you into a program, get you cleaned up, and back on your feet. You start fighting again." James flinched like the words had hit him in the chest. He shook his head, exhaling sharply. "Come on, man." "I'm serious, James." Dwayne's eyes locked onto his. "You told me back in that truck that you knew how to fight your way out of bad situations. Well, you're in one. So what are you gonna do?" James's jaw tensed. He looked down at his hands, shaking his head. "You don't get it, man. I've been through all this before. Programs, shelters. They tell you they'll help, but you get stuck waiting. Paperwork, government red tape. Then something goes wrong, and suddenly you're back on the street. It's a cycle. Guys like me don't get out." "That's bullshit." Dwayne said it so plainly, so matter-of-factly, that James actually blinked. "You don't know that." "Yeah, I do," Dwayne shot back. "You know how? Because I've seen people claw their way back from worse. I've seen guys with nothing, less than nothing, turn it around. Hell, I've been there myself. Maybe not like you, maybe not this deep, but I've been damn close." James gave him a doubtful look. "You? The Rock? The guy worth millions?" Dwayne leaned in closer. $7. James frowned. "What?" "That's what I had to my name at one point. $7, no car, no home, just me and my hands, trying to figure out how the hell I was gonna make something of myself. You think I had a way out? You think I wasn't scared?" James didn't answer. "But here's the thing," Dwayne went on, voice dropping low. "I made a choice. I didn't wait for someone to hand me a way out. I took it. And right now, that's what I'm offering you. You don't have to trust me. You don't even have to believe in it. But if you step out of this diner and go back to that sidewalk, then you're making a choice, and you know it." James exhaled, rubbing his hands over his face. His fingers curled into his temples, and for a moment, he looked like a man on the verge of saying no. The easy answer, the safe answer. Then he let out a sharp breath. "Damn it!" Dwayne grinned. "That a yes?" James pointed a finger at him. "If this is some celebrity stunt, I swear to God." "No cameras," Dwayne promised. "No press. Just you and me." James huffed out a laugh. "You're really not gonna let me say no, are you?" "Nope." Shaking his head, James pushed out of the booth. "All right, Rock, let's see if you're as good as your movies make you out to be." Dwayne clapped him on the back as they headed for the door. "Brother, I don't need a stunt double for this one." They stepped out into the cool night air, but this time, James didn't look quite so lost. Dwayne pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts. There was one number he knew he could count on. A veterans outreach program he'd worked with before, one that had real results. Not just empty promises, but actual people who got their hands dirty helping guys like James. He pressed call. "Hey, it's Dwayne. Listen, I've got someone you need to meet." And just like that, the fight had begun. For the first time in years, James wasn't just surviving. He was stepping back into the ring. The hotel room smelled like fresh linen and lemon-scented cleaner. It wasn't a 5-star suite, not even close, But to James, it might as well have been the Ritz-Carlton. The room had a bed, a real one, with crisp sheets, a warm blanket, and a pillow that didn't feel like it had been used by 100 people before him. The bathroom had a hot shower, and the small nightstand held a bottle of water and a handwritten note from The Rock. "This is your shot. Take it. No excuses. Fight like hell. See you soon." James had read it 3 times now, running his fingers over the words like they might disappear. For the first time in years, he wasn't sleeping on concrete, not curled up in a doorway, or crammed inside a shelter where people stole your shoes if you weren't careful. But sleep didn't come easy. Lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, he felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. What if he failed again? What if this was just another brief moment of hope before everything crashed down again? He knew how this story went. He had seen it play out too many times with guys just like him. A warm bed, a hot meal, a second chance, but then the ghosts came back and it all slipped away. He pressed his palms to his face. Number? Not this time. This time, he had no excuses. He had a chance. And if The Rock believed in him, maybe, just maybe, he could start believing in himself again. The next morning, James sat on the edge of the hotel bed, dressed in the fresh set of clothes that had been left for him. The jeans fit, the t-shirt stretched across his chest, snug but comfortable. He had showered, shaved, and for the first time in a long time, he looked in the mirror and recognized himself. The knock on the door came just as he was lacing up the new pair of boots. "Let's go, brother," Dwayne's voice boomed from the other side. "Time to get to work." James swallowed hard, ran a hand through his now clean hair, and pulled the door open. Dwayne grinned, arms crossed over his massive chest. "Damn, you almost look like a Marine again." James smirked. "Almost?" Dwayne clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You ain't back yet, but we're getting there." The next few days were a blur. Dwayne had connections, real ones. He got James into a veterans transition program where he met guys just like him, men who had been lost, beaten down, but were clawing their way back. The first night at the program, James sat in a circle of folding chairs, surrounded by men who had seen the same darkness. A retired Army Ranger with a prosthetic leg, a Navy corpsman who had lost his wife because he couldn't stop drinking, a former Air Force pilot who had gone bankrupt, trying to drown out his PTSD with gambling. No one spoke at first. Then James cleared his throat. I didn't think I was going to show up today." The men all looked at him. Some nodded. They understood. "I don't know if this is going to work," he admitted. "I don't know if I can fix all of this." He gestured vaguely at himself, at the life that had collapsed around him. The Air Force pilot leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "None of us do, but we keep showing up anyway." James exhaled. He nodded. Maybe that was enough for now. 2 weeks passed. James was staying at the veterans shelter, working part-time at a warehouse. His hands were calloused again, but from work, not from gripping a bottle. He had a schedule, a purpose, and every few days, his phone buzzed with a text. The Rock. "Checking in, brother. You still in the fight?" And every time, James responded, "Still fighting." One evening, James walked into the Veterans Center after work, his boots scuffing against the tile floor. He was grabbing a cup of coffee from the community room when he noticed something on the TV in the corner. His face. His story. The news anchor was talking about him, about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson stopping his truck that night, sitting with him at the diner, and getting him into the program. Someone had filmed part of that night and posted it online. It had gone viral. Millions of views, comments flooding in, veterans from around the country offering support, job offers, places to stay, people talking about the broken system, about how more needed to be done. James stood frozen, coffee in hand, watching the footage of himself on the screen, the hunched man at the gas station, gripping his old military ID like a lifeline. And then, the man sitting across from The Rock sharing pancakes. Someone nudged his shoulder. "Dude, you're famous." James huffed a small laugh. Jesus. His phone buzzed again, another text. "The Rock. Guess you're a big deal now. We should probably celebrate. You still like pancakes?" James smiled. Not the small, half-hearted smirk he had been throwing around for weeks. A real smile. He typed back, "Damn right I do." Months later, James was no longer a homeless Marine. He had a job, a small apartment of his own, and a steady place in the veterans community. He was mentoring other guys like him, men who needed someone to remind them that the fight wasn't over. One day he walked into the center and saw a young veteran sitting alone in the back corner, hunched over his coffee, eyes full of ghosts. James sat down across from him. "You hungry?" The kid looked up, confused. "What?" James leaned back, grinning. "There's this place across town. Damn good pancakes." For the first time in a long time, James wasn't just surviving, he was paying it forward. And somewhere, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was watching from afar, knowing he had done more than just stop his car that night. He had changed a life,